Well, Robert Wilson is, I would say, perhaps the most influential theater director, opera director in the world. And he has been creating incredible works since the late 60s. As an astonishing body of work, and we won't be able to cover them all today. We have about an hour before Bob will fly out back to Düsseldorf, where he's in productions, where he's in rehearsals for Moby Dick. And then you told me last night you were on your way to Paris also for the Madame Butterfly renewal. Was it the 14th time?
14th revival.
Yes. Quite incredible. So we were just saying that this is an artist talk and a meeting with you in the audience, a meet and greet. So it will be very informal. We'll play it by ear, and you are very welcome to raise your hands, give a comment, ask a question, so that this is not only my conversation with Mr. Wilson. That's very important. So I encourage that. And I want to point out to you that there are many friends in the room. I see even old colleagues from Stockholm Stadsteater, where you did the Dream play and Three Sisters in the end 90s. And yeah, so there's a lot of theater people in the room. But your work and your creations has really changed the notions of what theater can be. And perhaps the biggest bang was Einstein on the Beach in 1976, I would say. The creation with Philip Glass, that still fascinates people and that still is discussed, and also recently done in another production by Susan Kennedy. I will ask you about that later. But maybe to start with you and what we experienced here last night. How many of you in the room here were at Dorian last night? Yeah, so quite a few. And perhaps you even have a spontaneous question or reflection or comment on what you experienced. Bob was asking a lot of people at the reception last night about what was your favorite scene. I heard that, and it was a very opening question, and you spoke also about the beginning and the end.
About
the beginning and the end, of the importance of the very first scene and the very last.
very last.
Yeah.
My work is, to put it simply, is basically a time-space construction. So and it has always been. You mentioned Einstein on the Beach. So I started with very first conversation I had with Philip Glass in 1975. I had made a work that was 12 hours long and silent. It started at 7 in the evening and went to 7 in the morning. And Phil came to see it. And afterwards, he thanked me for the production, and we had breakfast. And I asked him how he wrote music. And he made a little diagram, and construction, a formal construction. I said, wow, that's how I make a theatrical work. I start with a mega structure, and then I begin to fill it in. And so about 20 minutes later, I said, why don't we make an opera together? And he said, that sounds like a good idea. So I drew, having met Phil for the first time for an hour or so, I drew this. 1, I don't know if you can see it, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C. Something like this. So it's Act 1, A and B. Act 2, C and A. Act 3, B and C. And Act 4 all together, A, B, C. We had no idea what the subject matter would be. And I said, Phil, how long do you think it should be? Should it be an hour? 2 hours? 3? 4? 5? Yeah, I think 5 hours. So now we know how long it's going to be. Still nothing about content or anything. And then I said, okay, we'll make A 24 minutes, B 22 minutes, C 23 minutes, A 24 minutes, B 23 minutes, C 23 minutes, and ABC, let's make them a little quicker when they're all together. So we'll say 20, 18, 19. So now I know more or less how long the scenes are going to be. Then I said, let's have 5 interlude scenes, knowing that my work scenically is usually complicated. I call them knee plays, like you have a leg and you have a knee. And this joins 2 similar elements. So we'll have 5 knee plays. We say 4 minutes, 4 minutes. The center one, 5, 4 minutes, 4 minutes. We had 4 hours and 58 minutes. So we talked about various subjects, and then we just agreed that it would be about Einstein. And I came up with the title Einstein on the Beach, thinking about the devil novel of On the Beach. Einstein, as a pacifist, was also responsible for the atomic bomb. So I thought I liked the duality of the personality. And I began to make drawings. What could 1A be? What could 2A be? What could 3A be visually? And then I drew the light. Einstein said, if you see a train crossing a field, from your perspective, you'll see it that way. If you see it from my perspective, I see a line if I see it from above. And so 1A, I had a train crossing the stage, interrupted 3 times by a vertical bar of light to represent the train. See, light was not done 2 weeks before an opening, but it was drawn from the beginning. It was architectural. I made these drawings according to this structure, theme, and variation, and gave it to Philip. Based on this time code, based on these images, he wrote music. So we didn't start with the text, we didn't start with the music, we started with this mega structure, and we began to fill it in. And in 59 years of working in the theater, I have never once told an actor what to think. They're given formal directions. So you walk here on a diagonal line, you work here in a circular line. There are only 2 lines in the world, right? There's a straight one and a curve. That's all. So you have to make up your mind. Do you want 50 straight lines and 1 curved, or or do you want to have them all curved?
And when you worked with this structure, you also worked with a fascinating text I was thinking about how you work with texts also after listening and being so moved by Daryl Pinckney's text Dorian last night. But the text in Einstein on the Beach was Christopher Knowles, right?
I worked
will you
with
tell us
an
about that,
autistic boy. He had been in an institution for brain-damaged children. And Einstein, the text was primarily written by this boy. He thought mathematically. So you'd go, hat about that, hap, hat about that, hat about hap, hap, at hap. This was being corrected in institution. And what seemed to the ear initially, it was very arbitrary, these sounds that he was constructing. But when we recorded them, we saw that the structure would go 3/4, 3/4, 2/1, 2/1, 4/3, 4/3, 2/1. There was nothing arbitrary. So I thought the way Christopher was constructing text would be the right kind of text for Einstein. And then what we heard sung was the solfege of the music. Do, so, do, so, do, so, fa. Are the numerical counts of the music. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it was quite abstract for the most part, but mathematically constructed, which was confusing for the performers in the beginning and then for the public. But to me, it was like listening to the birds. Do they have to tell you something? You just listen to them. But Einstein was something special. I have also done King Lear. I did The Ring of Wagner. So if you have a text that's hat about that, hat about that, hat, you deliver it in one way. It's kind of like the weather in the room. It has to have a transparency, and you can't impose a meaning because there is no meaning. But if I'm directing Shakespeare, Hamlet, which I've done, or King Lear, or The Ring of Wagner, that's a different kind of text. There is something to understand the words.
And can you tell, since many of us saw Dorian or will see it, a little bit about your collaboration with Daryl Pinckney? You've been working together since 1989?
Yes.
How does the collaboration between him look like?
I started the structure, same way with the structure. Mm-hmm. It's like, let's say everyone in this room lives in an apartment building, and an architect designs the building. But this woman can live in the building, and she wants her apartment to be a certain way, and this man lives in the building, and he wants his apartment to be another way. And someone else lives in the building, they want it their way. So we all can live in the apartment building and have our own aesthetics, but it's the architect who makes the megastructure. So for Dorian, I said, okay, the first scene will be dark, will be very crowded and very dense. The next scene is very empty. First scene is an older man. The second scene is I don't know. I went through and made a structure of what it looked like visually, and with some ideas, suggestions of text. I thought that about Dorian as a multifaceted character, and we see I became interested in Francis Bacon and the parallel between Francis Bacon and Dorian Gray, the original story. And it was a story with Dorian Gray that he was asleep one night in his studio and a man entered, a thief. And Dorian, he woke up, and Bacon did. and discovered the man, and instead of calling the police, he painted his portrait.
Yeah.
And
they started a relationship
and
also.
then they became lovers.
Yeah.
And the lover hated Francis Bacon's paintings. He said, they're so ugly. He couldn't understand why people wanted to acquire them. But after a while, they became famous because people were paying so much money for his portrait. So there is this duality of this persona. And so I said, okay, we have maybe, the reason we work is to say, what is it? So if you know what you're doing, there's no reason to do it. So it should always remain a question. But I could see the man in the first scene in a darker, crowded space, and we don't know exactly if he's a thief or whatever, but the next scene, it's if he's becoming famous, like a Hollywood movie stars. So then he's all in white, the scene's all white, and the lights flashing on him. And then another scene follows, and we see him in a more demonic way, I don't know. But then, as Linda said, I often do the end first. So if I know where I'm going, it helps. And then do the beginning. And the most important second in theater is the last. And the next important second is the first. And sometimes you get the last second right, they'll forgive you for everything else. So it has the most weight. So I did that, and I thought then that after the final word, to have a little dessert and to have something very light for the audience to leave. So I gave that structure to Darryl as an outline. And I never really liked plays, although I've done them, that are ping-pong dialogue, what I call ping-pong. How are you this morning? Yeah, I'm okay. Did you drink all that vodka last night? Yeah, I did. Are you hungover? It's like, that's how most plays are constructed, I try to keep away in my own works from ping-pong dialogue. But so this was a long monologue, and it's something that you freely associate with. So in working with Christian, I gave him formal directions.
Christian Friedel, the outstanding actor who was performing in Dorian.
So that his special talents is that he can speak very quietly. He can sing very softly. And when he speaks very quietly, we listen more carefully. And he also, his emotion comes from the right place. It's from here, not from here. That's expressing text, expressing music. That will always be false. All movement, all sound must start here, not there. And we must always start in silence to hear, and then you speak. Or you can speak with an attack, but there are no stops in theater for me. It's only go. So if you're listening to the silence and you make a sound, it's only continuing the sound that's already there. It's the same thing with movement. As long as you're alive, you're moving, right? Breathing. And if you want to make a movement, then it only continues the movement that's already there. If you go to the theater tonight, more than likely you'll see an actor walking on stage and stop, and then start to walk again. No, 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 no. If you're walking on a stage and you stop, the line continues. So,
talking about Christian a little bit more, how did you two meet, and what is it that you're looking for when you're finding actors for your work?
I think what's important is what I said earlier, that stay open, that always keeping in mind, what is it that I was very much influenced by a man who was head of the Department of Psychology when I first made my first work in the theater. I had adopted a black, deaf, mute boy who had never been to school and knew no words. I had grown up in Alabama and Louisiana in rural communities. As far as I could tell, he knew no words. I thought, how does he think? I thought in words, but it became apparent after a while that he thought in terms of visual signs and signals. So if he was sitting here with you, he would not hear the words I'm speaking, but would begin to read. This woman just looked down, now she looked up. I see a man is turning his head, looking out a window. He began to read the body language as what was going on in the room. So he would frequently understand the situation differently than I did, because I was preoccupied in what I was hearing. So the psychiatrist that I got to know, Daniel Stern, he was doing experiments in pre-verbal communication with mothers and babies. A baby would cry, and the mother would reach for the baby, take the baby, and comfort the baby. And Dan did a curious thing. This 1967, 67. Yeah. He made over 250 films of mothers picking up babies in natural situations when a baby would cry. In 8 out of 10 cases, the initial reaction of the mother in the first frame, the first 2 frames, no more than the first 3 frames. There are 24 frames in a second. So we're talking about 1/24 of a second, is that the mother is lunging at the child. The child is, next 2 or 3 seconds, the mother, something else. And the child's, next 2 or 3 seconds, the mother's something else. So that in 1 second of time, it's very complex what is happening between the mother and the baby. And the mother thinks, I love my child. And she's terrified when she sees frame by frame what's happening in 1 second. That the body perhaps is moving faster than we think, but there is a language there. Suzanne Langer in the late 60s talked about the impingements on the body as a language. So my first work were very much about thinking, constructing a work that were all silent visually, and were based on observations of this deaf boy and dreams he had as well. But
yeah, and you said, I think somewhere, that lighting is the most important element of the theater. You still think
light is, because it's the element that helps us to hear and see. If there were two children sitting here at the table in front of me, and I have to perform Medea. How do I murder those children on stage with two children sitting there? So it needs light. The darkness needs light. I take my black sleeve here and I put it against my black jacket. That's one thing. But I take the white paper and I put it against the black jacket. The black is blacker because of the white. So I am now doing Medea. Maybe she's an angel of death. Every opposite needs its opposite. So how to bring light in the darkness? So metaphorically, light must always be that way. But light for me is something I consider from the beginning. For Dorian, I lit the first scene first. First of all, I walked it myself. I said, okay, it'll be 38 minutes long. How can the first diagonal line is 27 minutes from the doorway down? How can I walk in 27 minutes and physically hold the audience without speaking? So physically, I have to figure that out, you know. And then, how do I do it with text? Sometimes in rehearsal, I turn all the lights out in the room, and I listen to the work like a radio play. Or I run it silently without the text to see if the body physically can maintain the tension, variation of movements or whatever, for 28 minutes on walking on one diagonal line. So a little bit like you're putting a silent movie with an audio, with a radio play. But I, before that, have lit it. So I light it from the beginning. And I sometimes tell myself very quickly, this is going to be light, this is going to be dark, and something, and this is going to be grayer or whatever. I just did an exhibition in Leipzig, and it's in 9 spaces, 9 rooms. I said the first one's going to be very bright and very colorful. The next one's going to be more gray and whatever. I made a whole structure in the museum before I placed the objects. I was very fortunate. I studied architecture, and my first day in school, in architectural school, Louis Kahn, the American architect, spoke. He said, students, start with light. Wow. That made a very strong impression. And so often in architecture or anything, light is the last thought. I know, I have to be careful. The most famous architect in the world. And he built a museum for a foundation. And for 300 and something million euros. And about 4 months before they opened, he called me and said, I'd like to show you the museum. And walking through, he said, what ideas do you have for light? What? 300 something million euros? And the thing is 3 months before an opening, and what are we gonna do for light?
Who was the architect?
It's a true story.
Yes.
Yes.
And I in the audience, I feel. But I never heard you speak so much about emotions. So I would like to ask you to maybe reflect a little bit about the emotional part of your work.
Well,
Thank you.
true emotion comes from the center, first of all. No director, no composer, no author can tell someone how to feel. It's impossible. So my work is formal, and the movements you saw last night with Christian Friedel, I did most of them myself. They were choreographed. Everything, whether it's a finger moving or eyes in back of the head and eyes more in front. They're formal directions, but he has to repeat them many times in order to get free. You're only free when you're mechanical. But how you feel in the form is up to him. So I can say it's more interior, more exterior, louder, softer. Those are formal directions. Lighter or rougher, smoother, quieter, louder. Those are formal directions, but I don't talk about feelings. And it's like if you see Giselle. So you see, why is there one woman that's the most beautiful? She's doing steps from Petipa from the 19th century. And you see 200 women dancing the same steps we've been doing since the 19th century. Why is there one that's the most touching? It's how she feels in the form. So the form is not important. The form is only a frame to give to you. It's how you fill in the frame. It's how you feel in the frame. And ultimately, that's important. And a director should never try to tell someone what to feel. You can't. Yeah, so they have at one time something very strict to the performer, and at the same time very liberating. I never tell an actor what to think, so they can think whatever they want to think. That's up to them.
And transfer it to the audience and what we should feel, or do you ever?
We cannot dictate that. You know, I cannot dictate what the audience is going to think. We should not do that. Stay open. What is it? What am I saying? How all occasions do inform against me and spur my dull revenge. Examples gross this earth exhort me. Witness this army of such mass and charge, led by a delicate tender prince, the nephew to old Norway, Fortinbras, whose divine ambition puff makes mouths at the invisible event. That's Hamlet. So I learned that monologue when I was 12 years old. I'm 82, and I'm still saying it. But each time I say it, I can think about it in a completely different way. And so there's no... Shakespeare couldn't completely understand what he wrote. It's meant to something we reflect on. So you can read it one night one way, and you can read it the next night another way. It's full of meanings, but to try to impose a meaning on it neglects all the other ideas of what it can be about. So stay open. Sure, you have some idea at the moment, that night, what you're saying, but the next night it can be different, even though you're doing exactly the same thing. So the only thing that is constant is change. Listen. Those sounds that just happened will never happen again. Never. So the only thing that's constant is change. And be open to that.
Through your work with the bodies and the light and the architecture, I think what creates such strong emotions as sitting in your audience is also that you make me hear things that I didn't understand that I was hearing yet. Like you help us focusing in many ways. You even make us see sounds sometimes. I'm thinking about the meticulous timing and the synchronicity and sometimes the counterpoints and so on. Can you talk about, you talked about time before and the 5 hours Philip Glass opera, but can you talk about timing also a bit, please? Because it seems like an important element too.
Well, it's time and space. So for me, time and space coexist together. I did, not too long ago, Verdi's opera Otello. Now, Verdi wrote Otello, it starts with a storm, so it's very bombastic and loud, lots of energy. My production, I started with a film of an elephant dying, and the elephant, it was a film of an elephant falling to the ground, the death of an elephant, in silence, and it was in slow motion. They slowed the film down, this big noble creature that for 7 minutes in silence was falling. And then we started the storm. The storm was much more powerful because for 7 minutes we had been in the theater in silence watching this elephant fall to the earth. So it's time-space construction that, I mean, you can do anything. You can start something bombastic and loud. I mean, last night, it starts very, 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 very quiet. And it ends with the text with a Christian walking to the back in this snow scene with the little house. It's very, very quiet. But we've just had before that a very upbeat, or after that a Hollywood or real showbiz number. So it's time and space construction. And time, for me, has no concept. People say, oh, in Robert Wilson's productions, everyone moves slow. So if I take my hand and I move it slower to pick up this glass, because the director has told me to move slow, that's one thing. If I don't think about it and I move slower than I normally would, everything's going on. The body is a battery of energies that are constantly changing. It's something you experience. And it has no concept. It's the experience in the body. It's not I'm thinking I'm moving slow and then you move slow. No. Think with the body. The body is a muscle. And experiencing something is a way of thinking. Now, I work a lot in Germany. I'm going back today to Germany. It's very difficult for the German actors or actors in general to experience something in their body that, because it's in their head. Don't think with the head, Think like an animal. Think with the body. How does a dog walk to a bird? His whole body's listening, right? The way that foot touches earth, his tail, his back. He's not listening with the ears only. See, when I adopted the deaf boy, as far as we could measure his hearing in decibels, up to 110 decibels, he heard nothing. I had a loft in a factory building. It was as deep as this room, exactly. And he was at one end of the room with his back to me, and I was at the other end of the room. And I called out to him, "Raymond!" And he didn't hear me. I knew if I would stamp my foot on the floor, he would feel the vibration and turn around. But I did a very curious thing. I went, "Raymond! Raymond!" in the sound of a deaf person. And he turned around. "Raymond, how are you?" "Raymond, how are you?" And he started laughing, like, "Hey man, you're talking my language." So his body was more familiar with those vibrations of sound. And in a sense, he was hearing. The body was feeling vibrations of sound. And the eardrum heard nothing. So the body hears. And that was a big lesson for me. Another thing that was extraordinary, my first play major work was 7 hours long. I wrote with the boy. And we were in Paris.
A deaf man's class?
The Deaf Man Glance.
Yeah.
So I had never studied theater. I had no idea. I'd spent my life working in the theater. I'd been to theater and I didn't really like it. But Raymond was in the play. And deaf people are quite often very anxious. Blind people are calmer. But Raymond was, like other deaf people, very anxious in general. And he would make this rocking movement. So we made a dance or a sequence where he's on stage doing something like this, standing. And then one evening, after we had been performing for, I don't know, a month or something, I said, "Raymond, put a sound with the movement." And he did this rocking movement, and then he went, I couldn't believe it. It was not the sound of a deaf person. "Hey man, how are you?" Where the sound is blocked and locked in the body. Here the sound was free. We started with movement first. And from the movement, the sound came. Some anthropologists believe that man was moving first, then making sounds, and later put with higher vibrations of mental thought and words were formed. But it came from movement. So often I stage, even the ring, I staged the entire ring 15, 16 hours long, silently first. Brunhilde had to stand for 8 minutes without singing and hold the audience, physically. But I very often then stage her work silently and then put text or music with it.
You said before, I couldn't help noticing that you didn't like the theater. So could you come back to that, please?
Well,
and I was also curious of your relationship to dance and choreographers, because you started in the 60s in New York with Cunningham and Balanchine and
I liked
Yeah.
the work. I went to Broadway shows. I didn't like them. I still don't for the most part. It's okay. But and I went to the opera, and I really didn't like opera. It was grotesque, the makeup and the dress and the outward singing, and it was just horrible for me. But then I saw the work of George Balanchine. George Balanchine was a neoclassic choreographer. To me, he was the Mozart of the 20th century. I liked it because it was formal, first of all. And I liked the way the dancers behaved on stage. That they didn't demand too much of the audience attention. They allowed the audience to come to them. And curious, I was like very much the abstract ballets. There was so much space, room for thinking. And later I saw the work of Merce Cunningham and John Cage, and I liked it also from the beginning. Often with Merce and John, the music was put on the dance only on the opening night. So what I saw is what I saw, and what I heard was what I heard. And they didn't have to illustrate one another. And I liked in the duality there, how that they could reinforce one another without being an illustration. And that had a big influence on me. Later, when I started to work in the theater, I did the same thing. In that what we would hear would be one thing, but we'd see another. But my work ultimately was not a collage. My work was structured. So I can say, I want to kill you! Or I can say,
He's my husband, you know.
I want to kill you. So maybe this smile is more terrifying than when I am expressing it. So ultimately, I see one thing, I can hear another, and it's the tension that exists. So it's not arbitrary in the long run. They start out arbitrarily, but I did Lohengrin at the Metropolitan Opera, the chorus of 150 people. So Wagner music and the Metropolitan Opera, of course, they want to walk on the beat of the music, because that's how they can sing. I said, no, I've got, it's actually more than 150 people, as a line moving to the audience. If you don't walk on the beat of the music, if you walk against the music, if you're slower going to the public, it's much stronger. That the music of Wagner is rushing and rushing and rushing and rushing, but what I see is this wall of people getting closer and closer to the audience. So what I see can reinforce what I'm hearing without having to illustrate. I never liked the idea of stage sets as decoration. They should be architectural and constructed architecturally. And like with Einstein, we started with the visual book first, structured. There was no music, there was no text. So the visual book was architectural. It was not decoration. 5 times, Washington, D.C. refused to copyright what I did as an author for Einstein on the Beach, because what I gave to them were drawings. They said, drawings don't constitute a book for an opera, but they were. That's where we started. It was the structure of the piece visually. It was not decoration. The light was not an afterthought. It was the first thought.
It's so fascinating to listen to you. Time is running, so we only have a few minutes left. So I'd like to open up for you for another question or two or reflection, if you like. And if not, I'm curious because you've been working globally and a lot in the US, but then also a lot in Germany and in Europe, and also in Norway and Sweden. What would you say, are there big differences for you to work if you compare the US and Europe? And since we're in Sweden now, we're particularly interested, I think, in what you're thinking, if there are any differences coming to Norway or Sweden compared.
I think one difference is that we're a young nation, you know, and Europe is older countries together. I think a big difference that you here in Europe live much closer together. And in the United States, we're this vast country, and we don't really know the borders. I was here in Sweden when 9/11 happened. And the night before, I gave a talk in Stockholm. And it was about 3 hours long, I spoke. And at the end, there was a Q&A. And a woman asked me, Mr. Wilson, what is the difference between Europe and the United States? And I said, we've never in the United States been invaded. Not until Saddam Hussein drops a bomb in the middle of New York City will we know where he lives. And this was reported on the first page of one of the Swedish newspapers. Oh. The next day on 9/11. But you've been invaded. You know, the English know where the Germans live. And it makes a difference. So, and then if we look at the Chinese, if we look at the Japanese, their culture is so much older that I think that's one of the differences. So I grew up in a town there was no theater. So look how many theaters you have in your country, and that they're affordable, so people go. I mean, it's incredible. You pay, $700 to go into a theater in New York. Can you imagine? You want to go with a family wants to go. It's not affordable. And the theater we have basically is boulevard theater, is entertainment. And you have repertory theaters, which is wonderful. I mean, you take Meryl Streep, I mean, she's a great actress, but how many times has she been on stage? Not many. She started out as a stage actress and had a success, but she's not been on stage. So if you take a young actor or actress and out of school they go into a theater, they're in a repertory company, and she has to work with Robert Wilson and do this crazy stuff I do, and then she has to work with a director who wants it done very naturalistic, psychologically. And she plays from anything from Shakespearean comedies to contemporary plays. So when she's 50 years old, she has a lot of experience under her belt. So I find it so interesting with the European theaters and the actors I worked with, like when I did Dream Play. I mean, they brought to the rehearsal a knowledge and a culture that we don't have in Chicago, we don't have in Miami, we don't have in San Francisco. We're a young nation. And,
Thank you. We had a question.
also, you live closer to your history. And if we have a history in the United States, if we lose our history, we lose our memory.
We have time for one or two more comments. Yes, please.
Maybe it's too big a question, but I hear maybe mistakenly two thrusts, which I wonder how you think about the combination. On the one hand, you emphasize so much what I take to be a process of discovery, the body as a muscle, trying to hear what is not so with your body. And on the other hand, you talk or emphasize so clearly the structural component of the play. And you come to it from two, at least potentially, seemingly contradictory positions.
Yeah.
How do you think about that?
Well, you have to do it. I mean, right now I'm working with German actors, and they're great. But so I say, can you run on stage? Can you jump straight up, land, kick, speak? Actually, when I left 2 days ago, that was the scene I was doing. So they run on stage, there's a little pause, then they jump, they come down, there's a little thought, and then they kick, and a little thought, then they speak. You can't think. You have to do. If you think, you can't do it. We say when a dog jumps up in English, he jumps up with no bones about it. But if he thinks, he can't do it. So you have to do it. So the mind is a muscle. You have to train the muscle. And this kind of work, you can't think too much. So you have to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. They asked Albert Einstein once, said, "Mr. Einstein, can you repeat what you just said?" He said, "There's no need for me to repeat what I just said because it's all the same thought." So it should be one line. And we are free when we become mechanical, as I said before. So the mind is a muscle. You have to train the muscle. And that is the body. And there was a diver, Gregory Louganis, a Greek diver, I don't know, 12 years ago or so. They won 10 gold medals for the Olympics. And I saw him, I watched him on TV, and I met him several months later in California. And I said, "How do you do it?" He said, "It's so amazing. I'd watched you on TV, I watched the other divers, and you're so different. What do you do? How do you do it?" He said, before I go to dive, I go through my head everything I have to do. I know that I have to take 24 steps to get to the top of the diving board. I know that I have to take 24 steps to go to the end of the diving board. I know when I get to the top, I have to be balanced. I know that when I end at the end of the board, I have to be balanced. And when I'm in the air, I have the feeling that I'm going up and not down. But if I think about it, I can't do it. So he programs his computer so then he does it. Look at the Olympics. Look at the Western pole vaulters and look at the Asian. I mean, it's amazing. look at the divers walking out at the end of the diving board, adjusting their weight, ready to dive, no? No. I mean, Luganos had rehearsed over and over and over that when he was there, he was already balanced. He didn't have to adjust. The pole vaulters, Asian especially, don't have to adjust. They're already there. Because it's not in the mind, it's in the muscle. And that is a good... those of you who saw the performance last night, and that was a lot of rehearsals with Christian, repeating over and over and over. I like the silent movie actors. Charlie Chaplin in the films he made, sometimes there were 275 different takes repeating of a scene. So if I do that, and I want to repeat it, wow, I have to do it hundreds of times to get free again. What I did initially free, I have to learn, go back and learn. Well, my hands were here, they were there, they were there. And then by repeating, it becomes free. I mean, you never really learn anything. You can start when you're 3 years old learning to play Mozart, 2 years old. You can be 82 and you're still playing Mozart, but you're still learning. So, perhaps it's different, than the first time. So I asked Suzanne Farrell, a beautiful dancer for the New York City Ballet in the 60s. I said, in Symphony in C, when you, at this moment in the ballet of Balanchine, I said, what do you do? She said, I have no idea. She said, but when I'm doing it, I know.
Hmm.
So,
That's beautiful.
yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing
you.
your thoughts with us.
Thank you. They say that the baby is born with the eyes moving rapidly, which is a sign of a dream state of mind. What is the baby dreaming? Thank you.
Thank you.